The cold came early to Tulsa that October, the kind that did not announce itself with wind or drama, but simply arrived one morning and pressed itself against everything it touched: the concrete, the brick, the iron dumpsters behind Ridgeline Elementary School, and refused to let go. It settled into the surfaces of the city before sunrise and stayed there all day, patient and indifferent, the way that certain kinds of trouble settle in and make themselves at home without asking permission. Cole Brannigan had been sleeping behind the east side dumpster for 11 days, not because he had chosen the spot for any particular reason beyond the practical. The loading dock overhang blocked the worst of the wind. The kitchen staff left the side door cracked open during morning prep, and the warmth that leaked through that crack between 5 and 6 in the morning was the closest thing to comfort he had felt in 6 weeks. He had found the spot by walking. He had found most things in his life by walking, by moving through spaces quietly enough that the world forgot he was there, by making himself small enough that the machinery of other people's lives simply ran around him without catching. He was 14 years old. He weighed 110 pounds. His hoodie had a tear along the left shoulder seam that let the cold in, no matter how he angled himself against the wall, and his sneakers had given out on the third day. So he had been barefoot since wrapping his feet in plastic bags he found near the bins when the temperature dropped below 40. He ate what he could find, which some mornings was a granola bar saved from the day before, and some mornings was a nothing at all. His mother, Carla Brannigan, had stopped breathing in a motel room off a Tulsa backstreet 6 weeks ago. Cole had been the one to find her. He had been the one to call 911 from the motel lobby phone because his own phone had died 2 days earlier and he had not been able to charge it. He had been the one to sit on the curb outside while the paramedics went in and came out with faces that told him everything before any of them said a word. He had been the one to answer the questions that followed, and to sit in the plastic chair at the county office while a woman with a lanyard and a tired expression explained his options, and to spend 3 weeks in a shelter on the north side of the city before he understood with a clarity that hit him like something physical that the shelter was not safe for him, and that leaving it was the only move that made any sense. The shelter had been full of men twice his size who looked at him the way people look at things they think they can take. He had lasted 22 days. He had taken what he could carry in his backpack, which was not much, and he had walked out before sunrise on a Tuesday, and he had been navigating the city in some configuration ever since. He did not cry about his mother anymore. He had done his crying early and alone, the way boys who have learned that tears draw attention tend to do in the dark of the motel room, before the paramedics arrived, pressing his face into the sleeve of his own jacket so the sound did not carry. He had folded the grief away somewhere deep after that and kept moving because there was nothing else to do. Grief was a luxury that required stillness, and stillness was a luxury he could not afford. Invisibility was his armor. He had not chosen it. It had grown on him the way calluses grow slowly through repeated contact with surfaces that did not give. He had learned early that the worst thing a boy in his position could do was be visible to the wrong people at the wrong time. So he moved quietly. He kept his eyes down in certain rooms. He read the energy of spaces before he entered them and made himself fluent in the language of not being noticed. It was not a skill, it was survival dressed up as a skill. The morning of Tuesday the 14th started the way every morning started. He woke when the kitchen staff arrived, their voices carrying through the cracked door, the clatter of pans, and the deep mechanical hum of institutional equipment firing up. The smell of whatever the school was serving drifted out through the gap, something with eggs, something warm. Cole sat with his back against the loading dock wall and ate half of a granola bar he had saved from 2 days ago, washing it down with water from the outdoor spigot near the gymnasium that had not been shut off for winter yet. The water was cold enough to make his teeth ache. He watched the school buses pull in from his spot. He watched the parents in their cars line up along the front of the building windows, fogged coffee cups visible through the glass, the particular morning stillness of people who were exactly where they expected to be, doing exactly what they expected to do, inside a world that had been built to accommodate them. He watched the children file in through the main entrance. Their backpacks were enormous on their small frames. Their voices carried across the morning air. Their certainty that the world was a safe place was so complete, it was almost visible, hanging around them like warmth from a coat. Cole did not envy them exactly. Envy requires believing you once had what the other person has. He was not sure he had ever had that certainty even before everything came apart. Even before the motel and the shelter and the 11 days behind the dumpster, there had always been something precarious about his life, something that felt like standing on ice that might hold and might not. His mother had done her best. He had always known that. She had done her best with very little to work with, moving them from city to city over the years in a pattern he had never fully understood, but had stopped questioning, and she had always made sure he had food and clothes and a place to sleep, even when those things cost her more than she showed. But the ice had never quite felt solid. Not once, not under any version of the life they had built together. The bell rang at 8:41. The last of the children disappeared inside. The parents drove away. The buses pulled out. And the sidewalk in front of Ridgeline Elementary went quiet the way school sidewalks go quiet every weekday morning. That sudden, sharp absence of noise that makes the air feel different for a few minutes, heavier and cleaner at the same time. Cole pulled his knees to his chest and closed his eyes. Not sleeping, just resting. Just letting the thin warmth from the cracked kitchen door do what it could against the morning cold. He smelled it before he saw it. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of something burning deliberately. Not the smell of a fireplace or a controlled burn. This was the thick, chemical, wrong kind of smoke. The kind that makes the back of your throat close up before you have even registered what you are smelling. The kind that carries in it the signature of plastics and synthetic materials burning at temperatures they were never designed to handle. Cole opened his eyes. The smoke was pushing through the second-floor windows on the east wing of the school, in slow rolling clouds that got darker and faster with each second he watched. It had the texture of something that had been building for a while before anyone noticed that weight and density that comes not from a fire just started, but from a fire that has already made its decisions about where it is going. He stood up. He did not know exactly what made him move. He would not have been able to explain it to anyone. Some part of him that operated below thought, below the conscious calculation of risk and consequence, simply registered what was happening and started moving toward it before the part of him that processed fear had time to file an objection. He came around the side of the building at a run barefoot on cold asphalt, and that was when he saw the adults. There were 11 of them on the sidewalk in front of the school. 3 teachers who had already gotten their classes out through the front exit were standing in a cluster near the flagpole looking up at the second-floor windows. 2 parents who had apparently not yet driven away stood near their cars with their hands pressed to their mouths. A custodian held a broom he had carried out with him for no logical reason. A woman on her phone had one hand pressed to the side of her face and was speaking in a low, rapid voice, her eyes fixed on the smoke. 2 more adults stood at the edge of the sidewalk staring upward. Not one of them moved. And from inside the building, from somewhere up in that smoke, came the sound of a child screaming. It was not a scared scream. It was the kind of scream that has already moved past scared into something more desperate. The kind that carries in it a full and terrible understanding that something is very wrong and nobody is coming. The kind of sound a child makes when they have already been calling for help for a while and have begun to understand that the help is not arriving. Cole heard it and felt it in his chest the way you feel a bass note from a speaker pressed close to your ribs. He looked at the 11 adults on the sidewalk for exactly 1 second. Then he ran past them through the front entrance. The heat inside hit him like a wall. The hallway on the ground floor was clear, but the ceiling above the stairwell was already black, and the air had a quality that was hard to describe, except that it tasted like burning plastic, and something sharper underneath that stung his eyes the moment he drew breath. He could feel it on the inside of his nose, and the back of his throat, the chemical bite of a building being consumed from the inside. He went up the stairs without slowing down. Slowing down meant thinking. Thinking meant stopping. He could not stop because that sound was still coming from somewhere above him, and it was the only navigation he had. The second-floor hallway was a different world. Visibility dropped to almost nothing within 3 steps of the top of the staircase. Cole pulled the front of his hoodie up over his nose and pressed himself against the wall, moving along the row of lockers with one hand trailing the metal doors, following the sound, which was closer now, which was coming from behind a door at the end of the hall that had a paper sun taped to the window and the number 204 stenciled above the frame. The paper sun was curling at the edges from the heat. He hit the door with his shoulder and it gave. The room was full of smoke but had not yet caught flame. The windows on the far wall let in a grayish light that filtered through the haze and gave the room the quality of a dream. Everything present but softened edges uncertain. Desks had been overturned in the middle of the room. Somewhere overhead, the ceiling had partially collapsed, a section of tile and support beam coming down at an angle across the back corner near the windows. And there in that corner was a little girl. She was 7 years old, maybe small enough that the collapsed beam looked enormous beside her, with dark hair plastered against her forehead and both hands pressed flat against the floor on either side of her pinned leg. One section of the beam had come down across her lower left leg at an angle that had her effectively trapped, the weight distributed in a way that prevented her from pulling free without help. She was conscious. She was terrified. She looked at Cole with the absolute focused desperation of someone who has placed everything they have left into whoever just walked through the door. No assessment, no hesitation, just the raw and complete transfer of hope from a child who has run out of options to the first person to arrive. Cole did not waste time on words. He got his hands under the beam, found his grip, and lifted. The beam was heavier than anything he had ever tried to move in his life. He felt the muscles in his lower back protest immediately, felt something pull tight and then begin to tear along the left side, felt his bare feet slip on the tile floor as sweat on his palms made his grip uncertain. The smoke was thicker down near the floor, and he was breathing it in now with every gasp, each breath burning a little more than the last. He lifted anyway. The beam shifted. Not much. Enough. The girl scrambled free, one leg dragging slightly as she pulled herself away from the wall. Cole kept the beam raised for 3 more seconds, shaking with the effort, then lowered it back to the floor and grabbed her arm and got her to the window on the far side of the room, the one that opened onto the narrow maintenance ledge running along the building's east face. He got the window open. The cold outside air hit them both like water. Cole went through first, turned, caught the girl as she came after him, both of them dropping from the ledge to the grass below, in a fall that was not graceful and not controlled, but accomplished the essential thing, which was getting them from burning to not burning. They hit the grass hard. Cole rolled. The girl rolled. They lay there side by side, coughing while smoke poured out of the window above them, and the November sky watched them from above with total indifference. The paramedics reached them within seconds. There were hands on both of them, voices asking questions Cole could not quite track because his ears were ringing and his eyes were streaming, and he was still processing the fact that the air he was breathing was cold and real and not trying to kill him. He felt them easing him onto his back on the grass. He felt scissors cutting through the shoulder seam of his hoodie, the already torn one opening it up to check for burns along his back and torso. And then the hand stopped. The voice that had been asking him questions stopped mid-sentence. Cole turned his head slightly. The paramedic beside him was staring at his left shoulder blade with an expression that had moved well past professional concern into something else entirely. Something personal. Something that did not belong on the face of a stranger who had never met him before. A shadow fell across Cole from the right, a large one. He turned the other way and looked up. The man standing over him was broad across the shoulders in the way that comes from years of actual physical work rather than any particular interest in appearance. He was wearing a leather cut with a steel phantom emblem on the chest, the silver thread worn and darkened with age. His arms were covered in tattoos that had blurred slightly at the edges over years of carrying them. On his left forearm, visible where the sleeve of his thermal shirt had been pushed up, was a single word inked in simple block letters. Jesse. The man was holding a little girl against his chest with one arm. The girl had stopped crying. She was looking at Cole with enormous eyes and both arms wrapped around the man's neck. The man's other arm hung at his side with the fingers very slowly curling into a fist. He was looking at Cole's back. His eyes were not the eyes of a grateful father. Rex Dalton was 48 years old, and in 48 years of living, he had seen things that most people only read about, and a few things that most people could not imagine. He had made decisions that had cost him years of his life. He had sat in a prison visitation room and been told that his son Jesse, 11 years old, had died in a state care facility while Rex was serving time. He had been carrying that information for 9 years. He had learned over those 9 years to move through the world with his grief organized, contained enough that it did not cost him the ability to lead the men who depended on his leadership or to raise the daughter who depended on his presence. He had learned the discipline of men who have lost something they cannot recover and have decided that the only available response is to keep going. What he was looking at on the back of the boy lying on the grass was a mark he had not seen in 12 years. He had thought with the force of wishful certainty that he would never see it again. He handed Maisie to a woman standing nearby without looking at who he was handing her to. His eyes did not leave the boy's back. He crouched down slowly, the leather of his cut creaking once. He looked at the mark the way a man looks at something he recognizes from a dream he spent years trying to forget. The paramedic beside the boy started to say something about needing space to work. Rex looked at him, just looked at him steady and quiet and without aggression. The paramedic found somewhere else to be. The boy on the grass opened his eyes. He tried to sit up. Rex placed one hand on his shoulder with the kind of settled weight that made moving feel like a genuinely poor idea. He leaned close. He said 4 words in a voice so low it did not travel more than 6 inches. The boy went completely still. Whatever color remained in his face after the smoke and the fall and the cold grass, those 4 words took the rest of it. They were in Rex's truck within 3 minutes. Cole did not remember agreeing to get in. He did not remember walking across the grass to the parking lot. He remembered the grass, and then he remembered the inside of the truck cab, the smell of motor oil and old leather, and something faintly sweet he could not identify, and the door closing, and the engine turning over, and the school and the fire trucks and the paramedics falling away behind them in the side mirror. Nobody stopped them. Nobody looked up. Rex drove without speaking. He took streets Cole did not know, moving away from the school and away from the part of Tulsa Cole had learned to navigate over the past 6 weeks. They moved north toward a part of the city where the buildings got lower and farther apart, and the lots between them grew wider and less explained. Cole sat with his back against the seat and his arms crossed over his chest and watched the city move past the window and tried to slow his breathing down to something that did not sound like what it was. He was not afraid of Rex in any simple way. Fear was too clean a word for what was happening in his chest. It was more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something very high and suddenly understanding without being told that the ground he had been standing on his whole life was not ground at all, that it had always been a surface over something else, and that whatever was underneath had been patient about waiting. He looked at the man's left forearm where it rested on the steering wheel. Jesse. Simple block letters, the ink slightly thickened at the edges, the way tattoos thicken after years of carrying them through work and weather. Rex drove. The city moved. The silence in the truck cab had weight to it, not uncomfortable exactly, but present like a third person in the vehicle who was not speaking. Cole was the one who broke it. He had not planned to speak first. Some part of him understood that the person who asked the first question in a situation like this defines what kind of conversation it becomes, and he was not sure he was ready to define anything. But the question had been building since the moment on the grass, since the look on Rex's face when he had seen the marks, since the 4 words spoken so quietly. They might have been wind, except that they were not. And it turned out he was not able to hold it back another mile. "You have seen that mark before," Cole said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Who made it?" Rex did not answer immediately. His jaw moved once like he was working on something with no give to it. He kept his eyes on the road. Then he reached into the center console with his right hand and pulled out a photograph that had been folded in half and worn soft at the creases from handling. He held it out without looking at it. Cole took it. He unfolded it. The photograph was old, the color slightly faded, the edges worn from years of being taken out and put away. It showed a man somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s standing outside what appeared to be a building. The man was wearing a jacket, and his expression was neutral, almost pleasant, the expression of someone who is comfortable being watched. His face was clean-featured. His eyes were pale. Cole looked at the photograph for a long time. The truck moved through the north side of the city. A traffic light changed ahead of them, and Rex slowed and then accelerated through the intersection. A hardware store passed on the right. A church with a sign out front passed on the left. Neither of them spoke. Cole's hands were not entirely steady when he finally lowered the photograph to his knee, because the man in the photograph was the man he had seen 3 days ago. Cole had been on the east side of the school property near the fence line, eating a packet of crackers he had found near the dumpster. It had been mid-morning, the school day already underway, the street mostly quiet. He had noticed the man because noticing people was what he did. It was automatic, built into him by necessity, the constant background processing of his environment for threats and exits and anything that might be useful or dangerous. The man had been standing on the sidewalk outside the fence, not walking, standing, looking at the school in the way people look at things they are actually looking at rather than simply seeing, still enough to be deliberate, present enough to register. And then the man had looked directly at Cole, not at the school, not at the building, at Cole specifically, at the spot behind the fence where Cole was standing with his crackers and his backpack and his 11 days of surviving. Cole had gone very still, the way small animals go still when something larger notices them. The man had held the look for exactly long enough to establish that it was intentional. Then he had turned and walked away, unhurried, in the direction of the main street, and Cole had stood there running the survival calculations. He had filed it under concerning but unresolved. He had added it to the list of things to be aware of. He had kept moving. He had not connected it to the mark on his back. He had never connected anything to the mark on his back. He had lived with it his whole life without knowing what it was, without understanding what it meant, without ever having anyone explain it to him. His mother had told him it was something to keep him safe when he was 6 years old. On the one occasion he had asked about it directly, and she had said that when he was old enough, she would explain it. She had never gotten old enough to explain it. She had died in that motel room first. Cole looked at Rex. "I saw him," Cole said. "3 days ago, outside the school fence. He looked directly at me and then walked away." Rex's hands tightened on the steering wheel, not suddenly, slowly, the knuckles whitening in a progression that was controlled and deliberate, the physical expression of something being held rather than released. He did not speak for another long stretch of road. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, measured in the way that things are measured when the measuring is an act of will rather than a natural state. "His name is Victor Crane," Rex said, "and if he was standing outside that school looking at you, it means he already knew exactly where you were." The words hit Cole somewhere behind the sternum. He sat with them. He did not ask the next question yet because he was still processing the implications of the first answer. The vertigo of understanding that something you thought was random, a man on a sidewalk, a glance through a fence, was actually deliberate, was actually the visible surface of something much larger and much more planned. Rex pulled the truck off the main road and onto a side street, and then off the side street onto a narrow industrial road that Cole had no reference point for. The buildings on either side were low and functional warehouses and machine shops and automotive businesses, the kind of infrastructure that cities require but nobody photographs. "There are people I need you to meet," Rex said, "and there are things you are going to hear that will change the way you understand your own life." He paused. "I need you to stay in the room while you hear them." Cole looked at him. "I have stayed in a lot of rooms that were hard to stay in." Rex glanced over. Something shifted in his expression, quick and gone. Something that might have been the beginning of respect, or might have been something older and more complicated. "Yeah," he said. "I imagine you have." The truck pulled to a stop in front of a low, wide building on the north side of the city with a rolling garage door and no sign above the entrance. The lot around it was gravel and cracked asphalt, a few bikes parked near the wall, a single security light above the main door that was on even though it was midday. Rex turned the engine off. He sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, looking at the building. Then he looked at Cole. "The men inside are going to want to see you," he said. "Not to hurt you, to understand is something that has been sitting unresolved for a long time." He paused. "What happens in the next while depends on one thing: whether your answers are the truth." Cole looked at the building. He looked at his own hands in his lap, the knuckles still raw from the beam, a long scrape along the back of his right hand from the window frame. The plastic bags that had been wrapped around his feet had come off somewhere during the run into the building. His feet were bare and dirty on the truck floor mat. He thought about his mother. He thought about the way she used to angle her body between him and doors when she did not know what was on the other side. He thought about the tightness that lived around her eyes in certain cities, in certain situations whenever certain kinds of questions got asked. He thought about the way she used to say when he was small and frightened, that the thing about the truth was that it was the only thing that did not cost more the longer you held it. He got out of the truck. Rex got out on the other side. They walked toward the building together, gravel under Cole's bare feet, cold and sharp. Rex pulled the door open and held it. Cole walked in. The garage was larger than it appeared from the street. 3 bays, 2 of them occupied by bikes in various stages of assembly, the third empty and swept clean. A long metal workbench ran the length of the back wall, covered in tools arranged with a neatness that felt almost ceremonial. Strip lights above concrete floor below a coffee maker on a shelf in the corner that looked older than Cole's mother would have been. There were 6 men inside. 1 was under a bike on the far left bay. 2 were at the workbench doing something with a carburetor. 1 was on a phone call near the back door. 2 were sitting on metal stools doing nothing in particular with the comfortable stillnesses of men who know how to wait. They all stopped when Rex walked in with Cole behind him. Rex looked at each of them once, making a circuit of the room with his eyes that communicated something without words, the way men who have worked together for years communicate the weight of a situation through posture and eye contact before any language is required. Then he said the 4 words he had said to Cole on the grass. He said them at normal volume this time. To the room, the effect was the same as it had been on the grass. Every man in that garage went completely still and completely silent and looked at Cole with an expression that sat in the space between disbelief and something older and more volatile underneath it. The man on the phone call ended it without finishing the sentence he was in the middle of. The man under the bike slid out and stood up. The 2 men at the workbench turned and set down what they were holding. Cole stood just inside the entrance and did not move and did not speak and looked at the concrete floor the way his mother had taught him to look at floors in rooms where the full weight of the situation was not yet clear. Keep your eyes down. Keep your hands visible. Let the room form its opinion before you give it more information. She had taught him that when he was 8 years old, in a different city, for reasons he had never fully understood. He was beginning to understand them now. Rex crossed the room and stood near the workbench and spoke to his men. He did not rush and he did not soften anything. He told them what he had seen on the boy's back. He told them who had used that mark. He told them the name that went with it. The man who had ended his phone call walked to the workbench and put both hands flat on the surface and stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Rex and said a single name that Cole did not recognize. But every other man in the room reacted to it in a way that made clear this name carried history, and none of that history was simple or clean. Rex looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. Outside, through the high garage windows, the October sky was the flat gray of a city that has made its peace with winter. Somewhere a few streets over, a vehicle was backing up its warning signal, carrying in the cold air. The radio mounted on the shelf near the coffee maker was off, but its red standby light blinked once every few seconds in the silence. And Cole Brannigan, 14 years old, barefoot, on the cold concrete floor of a steel Phantom MC garage in North Tulsa, felt the surface he had been standing on his whole life shift in a way that told him clearly that whatever he had believed about who he was and where he came from was about to change. Not because of what Rex had said, not because of the men in this room, or the mark on his back, or the photograph of the man outside the school fence. Because of what his mother had pressed into his hand in the last coherent hour of her life. A piece of paper folded small with an address written in her handwriting. An address she had told him with the focused urgency of someone saying the most important thing they would ever say to find if anything happened to her. He had been carrying it in the inner pocket of his backpack for 6 weeks. He reached into the pocket. He pulled out the paper. He unfolded it slowly and looked at the address written in his mother's hand, and then he looked up at the garage around him and at the door he had walked through 60 seconds ago. The address on the paper was this building. He had been sleeping 4 blocks from it for 11 days. He looked at Rex. Rex was watching him. The expression on the man's face was the expression of someone who is waiting for something they have been waiting a long time for and are not entirely sure they are ready to receive. Cole held up the paper. "She gave me this," he said. "The night before she died, she told me to find this place." The room went quiet in a way that was different from the quiet before. The previous silence had been the silence of shock. This one was the silence of recognition, of something clicking into alignment after a long time of not being aligned. Rex looked at the paper. He looked at it the way you look at something you have been carrying the absence of for years. Then he looked at Cole. "How long have you been in Tulsa?" he said. 6 weeks. "Where have you been staying?" Cole's eyes went to the concrete for a moment, then back up. Behind your dumpster, he said, the one on the east side of the school loading dock. Something moved across Rex Dalton's face that Cole had no word for. It was not simple, and it was not clean, and it lasted only a moment before the discipline of the man reasserted itself, and the expression was contained again. But for that one moment it was visible, and in that moment Cole understood that whatever this was, whatever he had stumbled into through the mathematics of a Tuesday morning fire and a barefoot run into a burning building, it was not accidental. His mother had known this place. His mother had known these people, or had known of them, and she had spent the last years of her life making sure that if she could not be there to explain things herself, this building and the people in it could do it for her. Rex made one call. He was on it for less than 2 minutes, standing near the back of the garage with his back to the room, his voice low and unhurried, carrying the calm of a man who has learned that the way you deliver information determines how useful the response will be. Cole could not catch the words. He caught the rhythm of them, the compression, the absence of anything unnecessary. When Rex hung up, he made a second call. That one lasted 4 minutes. Cole sat on a metal stool near the workbench and waited. One of the men, broad-shouldered with a gray beard trimmed close to his jaw, and a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin, brought him a bottle of water and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, without being asked and without saying anything while he did it. Cole ate the sandwich in 4 bites and worked on the water, holding the bottle with both hands, the way you hold something when your hands need something to do. His feet were still bare on the concrete. Someone had set a pair of wool socks on the floor near the stool's base. Cole put them on and felt in a way he could not entirely account for that the smallness of that gesture was harder to receive than most larger things had been. He was not used to small kindnesses. They had a way of getting through defenses that braced for big things. Rex came back to the center of the room. He looked at the men and then at Cole and then spoke to both at once in the way that men speak when they have decided the situation does not have room for separate conversations. There is someone coming, he said. She will be here inside the hour. She knows more about this than I do, and what she has to say matters. Cole. He said the name with directness that was not unkind. What I am going to tell you first is partial. I need you to hold the partial and wait for the rest before you decide what it means. Cole set down the water bottle. All right. Rex pulled a stool from under the workbench and sat down facing him, forearms on his knees close enough that the conversation could be quiet. The other men redistributed themselves with the practiced discretion of people who understood the difference between needing to be present and needing to be intrusive. Victor Crane, Rex said. I told you his name in the truck. What I did not tell you is what he was. He paused, not for effect, but for the kind of internal organization that precedes saying something carefully. 15 years ago, a man came into the orbit of this chapter, called himself a businessman, said he had connections, resources, genuine interest in what we were building here. He was convincing. He was patient. Those were his 2 most dangerous qualities. Rex looked at his own hands for a moment. We did not know he was feeding information to a federal task force, not because he had been caught and agreed to cooperate, because he had built the entire relationship from the beginning as an intelligence operation. He got close to men who trusted him. He extracted what he needed, and the information he provided cost people in this chapter things they did not get back. The garage was very quiet around these words. He disappeared before anything came to trial. Rex continued. The chapter's official position was that he was dead. That was a cleaner conclusion than the truth, which was that nobody actually knew where he was. He said the word officially the way people say words they do not believe. I have suspected for years that he was not dead. There is a pattern to how a man like Victor operates, the way he moves, the things he chooses, the marks he leaves. You can change your name and your face and your city, but you do not change your pattern. I have been watching the pattern. Cole sat with this. He sat with the specific quality of finding out that something you have carried, your whole life literally carried on your own body, was not what you were told it was. His mother had said it was something to keep him safe. Her voice had been steady when she said it. Her eyes had not been entirely steady. He understood now what the difference between those 2 things meant. How did you know my mother? He asked. Rex was quiet for a moment. Then, I did not know her well. She came here once 11 years ago. Sat in this garage for about 2 hours, left something behind. I have been holding it since. He reached into the inside pocket of his leather cut and produced a photograph folded carefully, the creases maintained rather than worn, the kind of folding that preserves rather than uses. He held it out. Cole took it and opened it. His mother was young in the photograph, younger than he had almost any memory of her, young enough that the face required a moment of adjustment before he could locate her in it, before the features resolved into something he recognized. She was smiling with her whole face, the kind of smile that has nothing behind it, but the moment it was made and no calculation, no performance. Just a woman in her mid-20s standing in front of a building and feeling, for whatever reason, uncomplicated. She was standing in front of this garage. Cole turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink and handwriting, he recognized, because it was hers, were 7 words. Tell him when he is ready. He read them twice. He read them a third time. He sat for a while with the photograph face down on his knee and his hands flat on his thighs and the word him in his mother's handwriting pressing up through the paper into his palm. Tell him when he is ready. She had written this 11 years ago. He had been 3 years old. She had come to this garage and left this photograph and this message, and then walked back out into a life he now understood had been considerably more complicated than she had ever allowed him to see. And she had continued to protect him in the way she knew how, from information she understood was dangerous. She had always intended for him to come here eventually. She left this for you to give me, Cole said. Yes. She knew you would recognize me if I ever showed up. She said you would have the mark, said it was the only way I would know for certain. Cole looked at the photograph again. His mother's smile, unguarded and real, the way she had almost never smiled in the years he could actually remember. She looks relieved, Cole said. Rex considered this. I think she was. I think she had been carrying something a long time, and she had finally put part of it down. The side door of the garage opened. The woman who came through it was somewhere in her mid-50s, wearing a heavy canvas jacket over dark clothes with short silver-gray hair cut close to her head, and a face that carried the set of someone who has spent a long time being careful and has not stopped. She moved through the garage with the directional certainty of someone who has been in operational spaces before and knows how to read a room in the first 10 seconds. Her name was Veda Briggs. She looked at Cole the way people look at things they have been searching for and are not entirely sure how to feel about finding. Not warm, not cold, somewhere in the space between where complicated things live. She sat down on a stool across from him. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at him with an expression that had shifted into something he could not name but could feel in his sternum. How much has Rex told you? She asked. Victor Crane, Cole said. The mark, the chapter, the disappearance, the official version. Something moved across Veda's face, quick and gone. Then I will tell you the unofficial one. She glanced at Rex. All of it. The parts you do not know. Rex nodded once. Veda looked back at Cole. Your mother's name before she became the woman you knew was Carla Weston. She was 23 years old when she first encountered Victor Crane. She had made a series of decisions over the previous couple of years that had brought her into proximity with people and situations she had not fully anticipated. Victor was operating inside the outer circle of this chapter at the time, presenting himself as what Rex described. Convincing, patient. Cole listened. He held himself very still. What neither this chapter nor anyone else knew was that Victor had been working as a confidential source for a federal task force for over 2 years. Not because he had been caught, because he had designed the relationship that way from the beginning. He inserted himself deliberately. He built trust methodically. He extracted information, and he fed that information to people who used it in ways that had consequences for men in this chapter who had genuinely considered him a friend. She stopped. She let that sit. Your mother found out, Veda said. Not through any investigation, not through cleverness, through bad luck. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she heard a phone call she was never supposed to hear. She was with Victor at the time. She was already trying to find her way out of that situation, and what she heard that night gave her both the reason and the leverage to do it. Cole thought about his mother's face in certain kinds of quiet, the alertness that never fully left her eyes in certain cities at certain times of night. She went to the task force, Veda said. She offered to testify. She told them everything she had heard and everything she had seen. A pause. I was the agent who took her statement. Cole looked at her. We put her into protective custody within 72 hours, Veda said. She was pregnant when she came to us. She was a mother when she left. The sound of a car passing on the road outside drifted in through the walls. Somewhere in the lot, one of the parked bikes made a small, metallic sound as the metal contracted in the cold. Everything continued exactly as it had been, and simultaneously, nothing was the same as it had been, and Cole sat in the space between those two facts and breathed. Victor Crane, Cole said. He is my father. Veda held his eyes steadily. Yes. He had known the next part was coming. He had known it the way you know the last line of a story before you reach it, that settling recognition that what you are hearing has been true all along, and you are only now being given the language for it. He had known it since the truck, maybe before the truck, maybe since the moment Rex had said Victor Crane's name, with the weight of a name that has a long history with your own. He let Veda say it anyway because some things need to be said out loud by another person before they become fully real. He looked at the photograph of his mother in his hands, young and smiling and relieved. She went into protection, Cole said. She testified. What happened after? Veda's expression shifted in a way that told him this was the part she had been building toward. Victor disappeared before the case reached trial. The official position was that he had learned about the cooperation and run. The task force closed his file as a fugitive. She paused. I am going to tell you something I have not told anyone in this room before tonight. Rex looked at her with an expression that was very still. Victor Crane did not disappear because he found out about Carlo's cooperation, Veda said. Victor Crane was allowed to disappear by the task force in exchange for something larger. Her voice remained even, carrying information she had organized against her own reaction to it. There was a senior official in the federal structure who had been facilitating Victor's operations for years, not above him, protecting him. The task force made a calculation. They let Victor walk in exchange for information that allowed them to move on the official. Victor knew this. He was part of the negotiation. She paused. The official was never publicly prosecuted. The case was managed internally. Victor walked free with the quiet understanding that he would remain unavailable going forward. The man with the gray beard near the wall said something low under his breath. Rex did not respond, but his jaw tightened in a way that was visible. Carla was released from protection 18 months after she entered it. Veda continued. The case had collapsed. Her testimony was no longer needed. She was given a relocation stipend and a new name, and very little else. Veda looked at her hands for a moment. I tried to maintain contact. She made it clear she preferred I did not. I understood why. We represented something she needed distance from. She moved, Cole said, multiple times over multiple years. She was protecting me. Yes, Veda said. She was protecting you. There is a difference between hiding and protecting, and she understood it. Cole thought about the different cities, the different schools, the different apartments, the tightness around his mother's eyes whenever they had been somewhere too long, and she had started to feel it the signal that it was time to move again. He had thought when he was younger that it was anxiety, something internal. He had never considered that it might be rational, that it might be a response to something real and ongoing. Victor found her, Cole said. It was not a question. About 4 years after she left protection, Veda said. You were 6 years old. Cole waited. He did not come for you, Veda said carefully. He came for her, to ensure her silence going forward, to place a period at the end of the sentence she represented in his history. A pause. But when he saw you, he made a different calculation. Cole looked at the concrete floor between his feet. He put the mark on your back, not out of anything that resembled a father's instinct, Veda said. He marked you as a contingency, a way of tracking what was his if it ever became useful. If you ever surfaced in connection with something that touched his interests, the mark would identify you. It would tell anyone in a certain kind of world exactly who you belonged to and what that meant. Cole sat with this for a long time. The mark on his back. The mark his mother had told him was something to keep him safe. She had not lied to him. Not exactly. She had taken the most terrible possible interpretation of what had been done to her son, and she had translated it for a 6-year-old boy who needed to be able to sleep at night into something that sounded like protection. She had done the only thing she could do, which was continue to stand between him and the truth of it until he was old enough to carry the truth himself. She had spent 8 years trying to get him old enough. She had not quite made it. Cole looked up. He looked at Veda Briggs, who had been an FBI agent when his mother was 23 years old and terrified, and trying to do the right thing with no tools and no safety net. He looked at Rex Dalton, who had been carrying a photograph in the lining of a leather jacket for 11 years without knowing whether the boy in the story was alive or dead. He looked at the Jesse tattoo on Rex's forearm, that single word in block letters, worn at the edges now after 9 years of being carried through work and weather. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans. He pulled out the folded piece of paper his mother had pressed into his hand in the last clear hour of her life. The address. This address. Written in her handwriting with a blue pen, the letters slightly uneven in the way that means a hand that is shaking is trying not to show it. He set it on the workbench between himself and Veda. "She gave me this the night before she died," he said. "She told me to find this place if anything happened to her." Veda looked at the paper. She looked at it the way people look at things that close circles they had not expected to see closed. "She never stopped trusting this place," Cole said. "No," Veda said quietly. "She did not." Cole stood up from the stool. He was steady on his feet. He walked to the side window and looked out at the lot, at the gravel and the few parked bikes and the flat gray October sky above the low roofline of the building across the street. "Victor Crane was standing outside my school 3 days ago," he said, "looking at me through the fence." The room behind him went very still. "Which means he knew where I was," Cole said. "Which means he has been tracking me." He turned back from the window. "Which means whatever he wanted when he put that mark on me 8 years ago, he still wants." Rex stood up slowly from the stool. "Yes," he said. Cole looked at him. Then he looked at each of the men in the room one at a time, unhurried. He looked at Veda. He looked at the photograph of his mother in his hand, young and smiling, and relieved in front of this building, in front of these doors, in front of the people who had agreed to hold information for 11 years on the chance that a boy she was trying to protect might eventually find his way here. He looked at the address on the piece of paper on the workbench. "She found a way to tell me anyway," he said. "Everything she could not say to me while she was alive. She routed it here, to you." He paused. "She spent however long she had left putting the pieces in place so that when I showed up, there would be a complete picture waiting." "Yes," Veda said. "Then I want to see the whole picture," Cole said. "Not the edges, everything." He let that settle for a moment. "And then I want to do something with it." Rex looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face moved through something complicated and arrived somewhere simpler. Somewhere that had been underneath the complicated for a long time. "What do you want to do?" Rex said. Cole looked at the Jesse tattoo. He thought about a boy he had never met, 11 years old, alone in a state care facility. He thought about his mother, 23 years old, walking into an FBI office with information she did not have to share and testimony that cost her everything. "I want to finish what my mother started," Cole said. The silence that followed had a different quality from the silences before it. It was not the silence of a room absorbing information. It was the silence of a room that has arrived at something, that has found its direction, that knows what comes next. Rex made a third call, 90 seconds. What followed was not something Cole had any frame of reference for. Rex spoke to his men for 3 minutes in the flat, direct way he had established as his register for serious information, laying out what Cole had told him, what Veda had confirmed, where Victor Crane had been seen, and when and how deliberately. He said the part about Victor standing outside the school fence twice. He said the part about how long he had stayed. One of the men asked a question Cole could not fully hear. Rex answered in a single sentence. Then the call started going out. Cole watched from the workbench. He watched the men in the room reach for phones and make calls that lasted between 45 seconds and 2 minutes, each one compressed, and direct, carrying information and receiving confirmation and ending cleanly. It had the quality of something that had been rehearsed not for this specific situation, but for the category of situation that this represented, the kind of emergency that this Brotherhood had established protocols for across whatever years had made them into what they were. 20 minutes after Rex made his third call, Cole heard it, A sound at the edge of hearing, low and distant, coming from the direction of the main road. A single engine, then another. Then more building, the way thunder builds, the individual sources merging into something that was no longer separable by ear. Something that became not a collection of sounds, but a single presence getting closer. He moved to the side window. He watched them roll in. Not one or two, not a small group. They came in pairs and clusters, leaning into the lot's entrance and straightening parking in rows with the mechanical precision of people who have done this before and know exactly where they belong in the formation. The bikes were mostly Harley Davidsons, a few other makes, all of them dark and large, and carrying the gravity of machines built for long roads and serious purposes. Cole counted. He lost count. He started again from a group he could isolate. 67. He stood at the side window and watched 67 motorcycles fill the gravel lot and felt the vibration of them through the concrete floor against the soles of his wool socks, and understood, without any frame of reference for this specific experience, that what he was seeing in that parking lot was significant. Not in the sense of impressive, though it was that too. Significant in the older sense of the word, full of meaning, pointing towards something. These were not men who had been called to be told about a problem. They were men who had been called because they were part of the answer. Rex came to stand beside him at the window. They stood there together for a moment, the man and the boy looking out at the lot, filling with bikes, and the men getting off them. They all came, Cole said. People in this world take certain things seriously, Rex said. This is one of them. Cole looked at Rex's left forearm. He thought about what it meant to take something seriously enough to ink it permanently into your skin, where you would see it every day. What it meant to carry the name of someone you had failed on your body for 9 years, as both penance and promise. He thought about his mother's handwriting on the back of the photograph. Tell him when he is ready. He thought about whether he was ready. He thought about what ready even meant, whether it was a feeling or a decision, whether it was something that arrived or something you chose. He had been surviving for 6 weeks. He had been surviving in various forms for most of his life. Survival was a kind of readiness, he thought. It was the accumulated evidence that you had made it through every previous version of the thing and were still standing. He was still standing. Near the back of the formation, 2 men separated from the group and came inside. Cole had noticed them earlier without fully registering what distinguished them from the others. They were older, mid-50s, both of them, one with close-cropped white hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the other thinner, with the economy of movement, of someone who has spent time in environments where unnecessary motion costs something. They carried themselves differently from the rest of the men, with a different kind of authority, the kind that comes from specific training rather than accumulated presence. Rex introduced them to Cole with a brevity that communicated the essentials. The one with the white hair was Decker. The thinner one went by Wren. They were Steel, Phantom. Both of them had been for years. But before that, Decker had spent 14 years as a financial crimes investigator in the federal system. Wren's background was digital, the kind of digital work that does not come with job titles that explain themselves. Between them, over the past 7 years, working on their own time through their own channels, they had been building a file on Victor Crane, not at anyone's direction, because they had understood from the beginning that the official conclusion about Victor being a resolved matter was not a conclusion anyone had actually reached through evidence. It was a story the system had told itself to close a door it found inconvenient to keep open. Decker and Wren had spent 7 years refusing to accept the story. The file contained financial records tracing movement of money through accounts across 5 states. It contained photographs, time-stamped, and geolocated documenting Victor's physical movements across 3 years. It contained documented connections between Victor Crane and the senior federal official. Veda had referenced connections that predated the task force arrangement and extended through it and continued after it. A thread of mutual benefit that had never been fully severed, regardless of what the official record said. It contained enough to make a real case, the kind that did not require anyone's persuasion to be taken seriously by a prosecutor. Wren had also traced the account that posted the video to a specific device, had identified the device's registration history, and had located its current position to within half a block. A motel on the north edge of the city, ground floor. Room registered under a name that had not existed before 8 months ago. Victor had not moved since posting the video. All the phones in the garage went off at once, not calls, alerts. The rapid overlapping buzz of multiple devices receiving the same thing simultaneously, the pattern that means something has happened and is already spreading. Veda was the first to get her phone out. Her expression shifted as she read, going the white of someone confirming a fear they have been managing with considerable effort. She turned the phone toward Cole. It was a video shot from outside the garage. The timestamp in the corner read 40 minutes ago. The lot had been mostly empty. By then, the formation not yet assembled the building quiet from the street. The video had been posted to an account with no name and no caption, and the view count beneath it was still climbing as Cole watched. In the background of the frame, half obscured by the rear corner of a parked car, stood a man. The image was slightly blurred from distance, but the face was clear enough. Cole had been looking at that face in Rex's photograph for the past 2 hours. He had been looking at it in his memory for the past 3 days. Victor Crane was standing outside the garage. He was looking directly at the camera. He was smiling, not with warmth, not with anything that resembled warmth, with the expression of a man who has decided to let you know that he sees you, that he has always seen you, that your awareness of being seen and is precisely what he intended, and that the next move is still his. He had not run when the bikes began assembling. He had stayed long enough to record this video and post it publicly and make absolutely certain that everyone inside that garage understood something specific. He was not afraid of what was gathering in that lot. He wanted this confrontation. Rex looked at the phone screen. Then he looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. "He ran the numbers on this," Cole said, "and he is still not moving." "No," Rex said, "which means he thinks he controls what happens next." "That is what it means." Cole handed the phone back to Veda. He stood in the center of the garage and he thought about a woman who had spent the last years of her life rooting a message through people she trusted to a boy she was trying to protect. She had not been able to finish the things she had started. She had done what she could, and then she had run out of time, and she had trusted that the pieces she had put in place would find each other. The pieces had found each other. Now it was his turn. Outside, 67 engines idled in the October cold waiting. The formation that assembled in that lot moved through Tulsa with the quality of things that do not need to announce themselves because their presence is announcement enough. 67 motorcycles in formation occupied 2 lanes of every road they traveled and generated a sound that preceded them by half a block in every direction. People on sidewalks stopped. Phones came out. A news helicopter that had been covering the aftermath of the school fire banked and repositioned when the convoy appeared below. Cole rode in Rex's truck at the front of the formation. He sat with his hands in his lap and watched the city pass through the windshield, the familiar streets of North Tulsa that he had been navigating on foot for 6 weeks, looking different from this height, at this speed, surrounded by this much organized presence. He thought about his mother moving through cities her whole adult life carrying a secret she could never fully set down. He thought about the specific exhaustion that must produce the weight of a thing you cannot share with the person you most want to share things with, which was him, which was always him. He had been the reason she ran, and the reason she stayed, and the reason she kept going when keeping going was the harder choice. She had spent 8 years after Victor found them trying to get Cole old enough to receive the truth. She had not quite made it, but she had built the road that led here, and the road had worked, and he was on it now. He thought about Jesse, Rex's son. 11 years old, moved through state care facilities while his father served time dying in one of those facilities in a way that 9 years had not made any easier to carry. Rex had the boy's name on his forearm in the place where his eyes found it every time his hands were in front of him. Not as punishment, as a commitment, as the promise of a man who had failed the thing that mattered most and had decided that the only available response was to spend the rest of his life not failing it again. The truck slowed. They were on the north edge of the city now, in a stretch of commercial road where the businesses ran to the functional and unglamorous. The motel was a single-story structure set back from the road behind a small lot, the kind of place built for practicality rather than comfort, and aged into something that looked like both had been abandoned some time ago. Room 112 was at the far end of the building ground floor. Its curtains drawn a single light visible at the edge of the window where the curtain did not quite reach the frame. Rex parked the truck at the lot entrance. The formation settled in behind and around them, 67 engines cutting out in a rolling sequence that took about 30 seconds, and left a silence that felt louder than the engines had. The sudden quiet of that many machines stopping at once had a physical quality, like pressure releasing. Victor Crane was standing outside the door of room 112. He had been waiting for them. He was wearing a jacket over dark clothes, his hands at his sides, his posture carrying the ease of a man who has decided he is not going to show anything, and has made that decision far enough in advance that it no longer requires effort. His face was the face from the photograph, older now lines that had not been there 12 years ago, but the eyes, the same pale and still, and carrying the quality of someone who calculates the value of everything he looks at. He scanned the formation. His expression did not change. Then his eyes found the truck at the front of the lot. They moved to the passenger window. They found Cole. Something shifted in his face. It was small and fast and gone before most people would have caught it. But Cole was close enough for the light above the motel door to reach him, and Cole had spent 14 years reading micro-expressions for information that could be useful, and he caught it. Victor Crane had not expected him to be here. He had expected Rex. He had expected the formation. He had calculated for the grief and loyalty of a brotherhood and built his position around managing both. He had not calculated for the boy. Rex opened his door and got out. He walked toward Victor at a pace that was unhurried and purposeful. Cole opened his own door. Rex heard it. He turned one hand raised slightly, not a command, but a question. Cole got out. He walked around the front of the truck. He came up beside Rex and then kept walking one step past Rex, 2 steps until he was standing in front of Rex, rather than beside him between Rex and the motel door, in the position that said without any words that whatever happened next, the person Victor Crane would deal with first was not the man he had been expecting. Rex did not move to correct this. Victor looked at Cole for a long moment. The calculation happening behind those pale eyes was visible, if you knew how to look for it, the rapid reassessment, the new variables being incorporated, the model being revised. He had spent 12 years being careful. He had spent those same 12 years knowing in the way that people who have done what he had done know things that there was a loose end out in the world with his mark on it. He had found the loose end. He had positioned himself to manage it. He had not considered that the loose end might position itself first. Cole reached into the outer pocket of the jacket someone had given him. He pulled out the piece of paper his mother had pressed into his hand in the last clear hour of her life. The address, her handwriting. He looked at it once. Then he crouched down and placed it on the ground in front of Victor Crane. He set it down the way you set down something you no longer need to carry with intention and without drama. He stood back up. "She found a way to tell me anyway," Cole said. Victor looked at the paper on the ground. He looked at it for long enough that the silence had weight. Then he looked back up at Cole. For the first time since they had pulled into the lot, something shifted in the architecture of his expression. Not dramatically. A hairline shift, something moving behind the calculation that was older than calculation, something that did not have a name in the vocabulary of a man who had built his entire life on the management of exposure. He had put a mark on a 6-year-old boy to use him as a contingency. He had stood outside a school fence and looked through it at a 14-year-old surviving on crackers and plastic bags wrapped around his feet. He had posted a video and waited with the confidence of a man who believed he had already determined the outcome. He had not anticipated that the boy would be the one who walks toward him. He had not anticipated the piece of paper on the ground, the address in a dead woman's handwriting, the evidence that Carla had built a route around him before she ran out of time to use it herself. Victor looked at the paper. He looked at Cole. He opened his mouth. "She was smarter than I gave her credit for," he said. The words came out quieter than he intended. They were not Cole understood for Rex or for the 67 men behind them. They were for no one in particular, which meant they were for himself. The words of a man registering something he had miscalculated. Cole did not respond. There was nothing to respond to. Whatever Victor had to say, he had already said the thing that mattered by coming here, by waiting, by believing the confrontation would go the way he had planned it. It had not gone the way he planned it. Decker and Wren had moved while Victor's attention was on Cole. They had gone to the motel office through a side arrangement with the property manager, a still phantom contact who had no desire to be in the middle of what was assembling in his parking lot, and every practical reason to be cooperative, and had obtained authorized access to room 112. They came out 4 minutes later. Decker was carrying a hard case. He brought it directly to Rex. Rex opened it. Inside, visible from where Cole stood, were additional materials that matched and extended what Decker and Wren had already assembled over 7 years. Victor had been keeping records of his own, the particular insurance of a man who operates in spaces where leverage is the only real currency. Those records were now part of Decker's package. A vehicle pulled into the motel lot from the far entrance. A plain sedan, dark without markings. Detective Garrett Locke got out. Locke was 51 years old and had been with the Tulsa Police Department for 23 years, the last 9 of them as a detective. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a gray jacket and carrying a small notebook he rarely wrote in because he preferred to hold information in his head until it formed a shape he could use. He had received a call 40 minutes ago that had been unlike most calls he received in its brevity and specificity. He had been told what to expect, where to come, and what he would be handed when he arrived. He had been told that what he did with it was his decision and that the people calling understood it was not a simple one. He walked across the lot toward Rex. His eyes moved across the formation without commentary, taking inventory the way he took inventory of everything quietly and completely. He looked at Cole, then at Rex, then at the door of room 112, then at Victor Crane, who had not moved. He stayed, Locke said. He stayed, Rex confirmed. Locke looked at Victor with the assessment of a man who has spent 23 years reading people and has arrived at a conclusion he did not need much time to reach. Then he turned to Rex and took the package Decker brought forward in the hard case plus a separate, organized folder documents, assembled with the systematic care that does not happen under pressure, but over years of patient, deliberate effort. He held it for a moment with both hands. He looked at Cole. "You are the boy from the school fire," he said. "Yes, sir." Locke looked at him for a moment longer. "You did a brave thing this morning." Cole did not answer that. He was not sure brave was the right word for something that had happened before he had time to consider whether it was brave or not. Locke looked back at the package in his hands. He looked at it the way people look at things they know will change the trajectory of their life in a direction they cannot fully see yet. Then he looked at Victor Crane one more time, a long, direct look, the look of a man saying something without saying it. Then he walked toward room 112 to begin the work that the package made possible. Victor Crane was taken into custody at 9:47 that evening. He did not resist in any meaningful way. He did not speak beyond what the situation required. He looked at the moment the cuffs went on like a man who had made a miscalculation he was still in the process of understanding. He would spend considerable time in the months that followed looking for the variable he had missed. He would not find it, because the variable he had missed was not tactical. It was not about resources or information or the number of motorcycles in a parking lot. It was a boy on a cold morning who had gone into a burning building without stopping to calculate the amount, and who had carried a piece of paper in his backpack for 6 weeks, and who had stood in a garage on the north side of Tulsa and said he wanted to finish what his mother started. Victor had built his entire position around the assumption that the boy was an asset to be managed, a variable to be leveraged, something that existed in relation to his own purposes. He had not built for a boy with purposes of his own. Locke handed the package to the state prosecutor's office, bypassing the intermediate steps in the departmental chain of command he had been specifically instructed to route things through. This was not an accident. The instruction had come from someone 2 levels above the police chief, someone who had a long and carefully maintained relationship with the senior federal official whose name ran through Decker's documents like a thread through a piece of cloth. Locke had understood, when the instruction arrived, exactly what it meant. He had also understood what bypassing it would cost him. He handed the package directly to an assistant state prosecutor named Caldwell, who had no connection to the federal official and no reason to manage the situation in anyone's interest but the law's. Caldwell received it with the expression of someone being handed something they had been waiting for without knowing they were waiting for it. Locke lost his badge inside a month. The departmental process was efficient and not particularly unkind as these things go. There was a review board, there were findings, there was a determination that Detective Garrett Locke had violated chain of command protocols in a manner inconsistent with departmental expectations. His 23 years of service were noted. The outcome was the outcome. He cleaned out his desk on a Thursday morning and drove home in the early afternoon and sat in his kitchen and made coffee and thought about the package he had handed to Caldwell and the look on Caldwell's face when he had read the first 3 pages. He did not lose sleep over the badge. The following morning, he found a plain white envelope in his mailbox. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a small embroidered patch, the steel Phantom MC emblem, silver thread worn and darkened with use, and a piece of paper folded once with 3 words written in a hand he did not recognize. One of us. He held the patch for a long time, turning it over in his hands in the morning light that came through his kitchen window. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket, in the place where things go that you intend to keep. Rex came back to the garage at 11:15. He came in through the main bay door, and the first thing he did was look for Cole. He found him in the back room where the night had started, sitting on the metal stool, the jacket 3 sizes too large on his shoulders, the wool socks on his feet, the photograph of his mother face up on his knee. Rex sat down on the overturned crate across from him. They sat in the quiet of the room together without speaking for a while. Outside in the lot, someone was moving bikes, the low rumble of engines repositioning the sound of tires on gravel. In the outer garage, one of the men had started a pot of coffee, and the smell of it drifted through the gap under the door. The blink of the radio's standby light on the shelf moved in and out of Cole's peripheral vision, slow and steady. Cole looked at the photograph. His mother, young, unguarded, standing in front of this building with a smile that had nothing behind it but the moment. He had looked at it enough times in the past hours that he had memorized the specific angle of her face, the particular way her weight was distributed, the detail of her left hand raised slightly as if she had been in the middle of a gesture when the shutter went. She had come here when he was 3 years old. She had sat in this garage and told the truth to people who could hold it, and then she had walked back out into a life she had built from almost nothing, with one thing attached to it that she could not put down. Him. He had always been the reason and the limitation simultaneously. The reason she kept going and the reason she could not go far enough. She had carried the weight of keeping him safe and the weight of keeping him ignorant of why he needed to be kept safe. And she had carried both of those things for 8 years after Victor found them, and she had not put either of them down until her body stopped letting her carry anything. Cole turned the photograph over, read the 7 words. He did not need to read them again. He knew them. But he read them because some things are worth doing with intention. Tell him when he is ready. He thought about what ready meant. He had been asking himself that since the garage, since Veda had laid out the shape of the thing, and Cole had said he wanted to finish what his mother started, and Rex had asked what that meant. He had spent the hours since operating on a kind of momentum that did not require him to fully answer the question, the momentum of things in motion, of events moving faster than reflection. Now the events had stopped, and the question was still there. He looked at Rex. Rex was watching him with the patient steadiness of a man who has learned to wait for things to surface in their own time. "Jesse," Cole said. His voice was quiet in the room. How old would he be now? Rex was still for a moment. It was the stillness of a word hitting something that does not move much. 20, Rex said. 20 this March. Cole thought about that. 20. A person fully formed with whatever he would have grown into. The interests and the opinions in the particular way he would have existed in the world. All of it somewhere in the space of what had not happened. Did he like motorcycles? Cole asked. Rex looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face moved through something complicated and arrived somewhere simpler, somewhere that had been underneath the complicated for a long time and did not often get visited. He smiled, not a large smile, the small, real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere that does not perform. He would have, Rex said. I know he would have. Cole looked at the Jesse tattoo on Rex's forearm, that single word worn at the edges after 9 years of being carried through work and weather. He thought about a father who had made terrible choices and was still making them into something, who had kept a photograph for 11 years because someone had trusted him to hold it, who had asked a 14-year-old boy if he wanted to stay behind and had not argued when the answer was no. Rex reached into his leather cut. He produced a small cloth bundle folded flat and placed it on Cole's knee without ceremony. Cole opened it. Inside was a patch, small, the kind you sew on rather than iron, with the steel Phantom emblem on it. Silver thread, the same worn dark color as the one on Rex's cut. It was not a full member's patch. It was something else. something without a formal designation in the chapter's official structure, something that existed in the category of things that do not need paperwork because they are understood by everyone who matters. Cole looked at it for a long time. He thought about what it would mean to belong somewhere, not to be placed somewhere, not to be managed, somewhere not to survive, somewhere but to actually belong in the way that belonging implies reciprocity, implies that the place is changed by your presence in it and not just the other way around. He had never belonged anywhere, not completely. There had been his mother, which was its own kind of belonging, the primary kind, the irreducible kind, and there had been nothing else that came close. He did not know yet what this was. He knew it was an offer. He knew the offer was genuine because he had learned to read Rex Dalton with some accuracy over the course of this day, and the man did not make gestures that were not genuine. He knew that whatever came next, whatever the shape of his life looked like in the weeks and months ahead, it would be built from this room, from this night, from the choice his mother had made 11 years ago to walk into a garage and trust the people in it. He held the patch in both hands. He was not ready to put it on yet. He was not sure what he needed to be ready for that, what internal distance he had to cover before the gesture would mean what it was supposed to mean. But he held it, and holding it was something, and something was more than he had had this morning behind the dumpster on the east side of Ridgeline Elementary. He would put it on when he knew what he was putting it on for. He was not there yet, but he knew the direction. The door to the back room opened. Maisie Dalton came through it with the serious, focused expression of a 7-year-old who has been trusted with an important task and is determined to perform it correctly. She was carrying a plate in both hands, a real plate ceramic piled with food, the weight of it slightly too much for her arms, but her grip absolutely steady from sheer determination. She crossed the room carefully, watching her feet, watching the plate, occasionally watching Cole to make sure he was registering the importance of what was being delivered. She stopped in front of him. She held the plate out. Cole took it. Maisie looked at him. She had dark eyes that were very direct, the kind of eyes that have not learned yet to avoid looking at things. She looked at his face with the uncomplicated assessment of a child who has already made her decision about a person and is just confirming what she already knows. She sat down on the floor beside the stool. She rested her back against the wall and pulled her knees up and looked up at him with no fear in her face and no complexity. Just the clean, straightforward trust of a child who remembers being carried out of smoke and fire by someone who did not have to come back for her and who has organized her entire understanding of that person around that single irreducible fact. Cole looked at the plate. He looked at the patch, still in his other hand, the silver thread worn and darkened the emblem. He did not yet fully understand, but was beginning to. He looked at Rex, who was watching him with the expression of a man who has carried an absence for 9 years and is sitting for the first time in 9 years in a room where the specific shape of that absence has changed into something he does not have a name for yet, but can feel in the place where the absence used to live. Cole set the patch carefully on the workbench beside him. He would pick it up again. He would carry it with the same intention he had seen Rex carry things, the particular care of a man who understands that some things are worth the weight they require. He ate. The garage settled around him. Outside, the October cold pressed against everything it touched the gravel of the lot. The chrome of 67 bikes sitting in their rows under the Oklahoma sky, the roof of the low building, the narrow industrial road beyond it. The city beyond that, indifferent and enormous and continuous, doing what cities do, which is keep going regardless of what is happening in any particular room inside them. The cold pressed against everything. Maisie leaned her head against the leg of the stool and closed her eyes. Rex did not move from the crate. Cole finished eating. He set the plate down. He sat for a while with his hands in his lap and the wool socks warm on his feet and the photograph of his mother flat against his chest in the inside pocket of the jacket, and he let the weight of the day be what it was. He did not try to make it smaller than it was. He did not try to resolve it into something clean because it was not clean and the attempt would cost it something true. His mother had not gotten old enough to tell him. That was the thing he would carry longest. That was the thing that no resolution in any parking lot or courthouse would touch or reduce or change. She had not gotten old enough. And he had not been old enough when she was, and the distance between those two facts was the size of everything he would spend the rest of his life learning to hold. But she had found a way to tell him anyway. She had found the people who could hold the information and the photograph and the address and the seven-word message, and she had trusted them to hold it, and they had held it, and it had found him. He reached into his pocket and took out the piece of paper one more time. He held it in both hands and looked at his mother's handwriting. The crossed sevens, the slightly uneven letters, the particular blue of the ink faded to something softer than it had started as. Tell him when he is ready. He was 14 years old. He was not by most measures old enough for any of what this day had held. He was, however, the age he was, and the day had held what it held. And the person his mother had spent 8 years trying to protect, long enough to receive the truth, had received it here in this room on this night. She had known he would find his way to it. She had been right. Cole folded the paper carefully and put it back in his pocket and rested his head against the wall behind him and let his eyes close. 67 bikes sat in their rows in the gravel lot under the Oklahoma sky, the chrome catching the security light in the small silver flashes. The night above them was wide and dark and cold, carrying the particular silence of a world that had moved on to its next thing, while somewhere inside it in a north side garage that had no sign above the door, a boy who had been invisible for as long as he could remember was beginning for the first time to be seen. The cold pressed against everything it touched. It did not reach him.